Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Monday afternoon webinar series from Corwin, your no-cost platform for superior professional learning. Today's presentation is Co-Teaching for English Learners, how to maximize collaborative practice, instruction, assessment, and reflection with your presenters, Maria Dove and Andrea Honigsfeld. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Maura Sullivan, Marketing Strategist for Corwin, to introduce today's presenters.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Co-Teaching for English Learners, how to maximize collaborative practice, instruction, assessment, and reflection. You're in for a treat today. When it comes to more inclusive approaches to EL instruction, there are no two greater authorities than Maria Dove and Andrea Honigsfeld. Both hail from the Division of Education at Malloy College in Rockville Center, New York. Maria is an associate professor and Andrea as a professor. Utilizing their extensive experience as EL specialists, TESOL teacher educators, and on-site professional developers, Maria and Andrea are two of our most in-demand author consultants and have published widely on effective education for English learners, including Corwin's just published Co-Teaching for English Learners. Stay tuned until the end of the webinar for a special discount we're extending to all webinar participants. Enough from me, Maria and Andrea. I'll pass over the presentation to the two of you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrea Honigsfeld.
And I'm Maria Dove. Welcome to our webinar. All right.
Here is our very ambitious agenda for the next half an hour or 45 minutes or so.
We're going to explore the collaborative instructional cycle of co-planning, co-teaching, co-instruction, and reflection for English learners.
We're going to unpack 7 co-teaching models and their potential impacts on learning for English learners.
And we would like you to keep the collaboration continuing using the hashtag below, CoTeachForELS.
So let's start off by thinking of a teacher who is right now somewhere in the United States racking his brain trying to figure out how to differentiate instruction for English learners and wondering if his efforts are making an impact.
Right now, there's another teacher somewhere who, through trial and error, has figured out how to work well and produce positive outcomes for the English learners in his class. But unfortunately, that information stays within the confines of his own class.
But what if teachers had the opportunity for sustained collaboration and co-planning their lessons that are equitable and meaningful for all their students, including English learners?
What if administrators worked together to create the needed time and support so that teachers could collaborate in a sustained way?
Well, let's imagine the power of collaboration when Leah and Joel regularly reflect on their co-teaching experience in the high school math classroom that supports both math skills and language and literacy development skills every single day.
Imagine the power of collaboration when Nick and Dean plan together their lessons for making sure that both language and content are addressed and their English learners, their beginning English learners, are supported or well supported in the content area class.
Almost a decade ago, Rance Roney noted the following: in many schools, the EL specialist goes it alone. The EL classroom is viewed as the one-stop shop for all the needs of English language learners: testing, translating, counseling, editing college applications, and even healthcare. Well, this was the norm not just over a decade ago, but in some schools it continues to be the norm. And we passionately argue that this has to change.
So to begin our journey through the collaborative instructional cycle, we're going to first focus on co-planning. Many people think about co-teaching and just the act of co-teaching, what happens in the classroom. But we've discovered through our research that the magic is not in the co-teaching. The magic certainly is in um, the collaborative practices of teachers, such as co-planning, co-assessment, and reflection. So we're going to start with co-planning.
And when we think of co-planning, we're really thinking much more broadly. If you look at this chart, which is an excerpt from our latest book, you will notice that joint planning is just one of many other collaborative practices that are aligned to instruction to support English learners. Curriculum mapping and alignment, co-developing instructional materials, and participating in joint professional learning opportunities are just some of the other ways that co-teachers or teacher collaborators can work together.
We'd like you to meet two teachers that we know very well, Danielle and Nicole. Danielle and Nicole are now in their 8th year co-teaching together. And what Danielle and Nicole do best is that they collect a large amount of formative assessment data on all their students. And they use this data in order to provide instruction for their English learners.
Danielle and Nicole and all the other co-teachers that we have worked with also recognize that they bring different expertise to the table. The English language development or ELL teacher has a strong background in second language acquisition theories and methodologies, instructional models, linguistics, standards of English language development, and so forth, while recognizing that the core content teacher, the elementary classroom teacher or the secondary content specialist, is the primary expert of the core content knowledge, the specialized methodologies and techniques that are related to or needed for that content area, and so forth.
We've identified some co-planning essentials with the help of Santos, Darling, Hammond, and Chuk. Okay. And we find that focusing on these essentials often help teaching teams to address the needed issues of English learners. For example, language progressions, how students learn, both in terms of general language acquisition and also acquiring academic content area specific language. The idea of language scaffolds, how specific scaffolding can truly support English learners to access complicated concepts as well as the language they need to learn. So we look at these co-planning essentials and we support teachers in their efforts to co-plan using these types of lists to guide them.
We have also found that successful co-teachers establish a co-planning routine. And this is one particular sequence that we have found very effective. Both teachers have to be highly organized and have direct access to all the required materials, curriculum, resources, scope and sequence documents, and so forth. And then commit to engaging in the following sequence. Pre-planning happens when the two co-teachers are not together, but they decide on what are the linguistic or language and academic demands of the upcoming curriculum, unit, or lesson. When they come together, they co-plan.
And co-planning takes place and can take place in a shorter amount of time when there's organization and pre-planning involved. There's no thinking about the what. The what has already been determined during the organization and pre-planning period. So now, during planning, they talk about the how. How are we going to go about executing the lessons that we've identified for our English learners? And who's going to be responsible for developing which piece of material?
We also have recognized, as many of the co-teachers we worked with, that there is rarely enough time to finish the co-planning process during face-to-face meetings. So if that is not possible, then the co-teachers commit to post-planning, which means that the planning process is finished when both of them are on their own, maybe during the weekend, and they develop the necessary materials, while online communication, shared folders through Google or Dropbox continue.
You could probably do a Google search, and find images of co-planning templates, particularly from our special education colleagues. We have developed several templates. This one in particular is a unit planning template. This is when teachers come together and they really want to map out a whole unit of study for their teachers. Yet, there are teachers too who benefit from a daily co-taught plan. So here is an example of one of those where teachers identify how to begin a lesson, how to facilitate the lesson in the middle, and how to end the lesson. And they actually have conversations about which co-teaching approaches to use and who's going to do what during the lesson. This is an excellent tool for our novice teachers who have not had much experience with co-teaching.
And you know, Maria, sometimes when we go and visit classes, we often talk to teachers about establishing sort of a dance where the two teachers start the lesson together, sending the message to the class and the entire school community that in this class you have two teachers. So that's very important visually that the two teachers stand together in front of the class and they communicate parity or equity. But once we have two teachers in the room, we have to take advantage of these many different models, which we're going to go to in a few minutes, and vary the grouping strategies, vary the sequence in which the different parts of the lesson or the modalities that the different parts of the lesson are presented.
We very often find that in the facilitation part of the lesson, the middle of the lesson, students are grouped in various ways. And that's where the teachers can truly differentiate instruction for a variety of students in class.
And then one way to come back to that idea of parity and equity is to close together. So again, come back for the exit portion, the review and assessment portion of the lesson, and finish the lesson as a unit.
And that's the dance, together,
that's the dance.
Apart, together.
So back to a different kind of dance. We're coming back to the collaborative teaching cycle, this cycle we have already introduced earlier: co-plan, co-instruct, co-assess, and reflect. In the next few slides, we're going to explore co-instruction a little deeper.
So we have the first three models. You'll notice that the students remain as one group in one class, and the teachers take on different roles and responsibilities. In Model 1, we have one teacher leading and one teacher who we call teaching on purpose. And this is purposeful teaching. This is the type of model we like to see when maybe one teacher is opening a lesson with new information, demonstrating and modeling a particular skill or strategy, and the other teacher is supporting students who need a little bit extra information or support. This model is sometimes known as a dangerous model. We don't want this overused, but we do want it used purposefully. And since that, we called it teaching on purpose.
And you know, Maria, we just talked about the need for co-planning. If we don't co-plan, this is going to be our default go-to model. I come into your classroom, I look at you, and I say, what are we doing today?
I don't know. What are you doing today?
Well, I'll just circulate the room and I'll help everybody. How's
Great.
that?
Oh, that's wonderful. The problem with that is that the students will see one teacher as the real teacher.
And then the other teacher will be the helper, the highly paid aide. That's a frequent complaint that we hear. So we want to make sure that all the other models are also used intentionally and purposefully. And this one, Model 1, is limited to an as-needed basis.
Model 2 is one that we mentioned before the idea of two teachers teaching the same content to one group of students. And we find this is a great way very often to begin a lesson and end a lesson. That's that part of the dance we were talking about before. Now, just because two teachers are in front of the room doesn't mean they have the same roles and responsibilities. One teacher can be talking and the other teacher could be writing.
One teacher could be reading aloud and the other one could be thinking aloud or annotating verbally what is happening, showing some images.
Or one teacher can be solving a math problem one way and the other teacher can be solving a math problem a different way.
Absolutely. Another very powerful way of going into Model 2 is asking yourself the question, what can two teachers do better than one could do alone? One of our favorite examples is to have a conversation with somebody or to have a debate to represent different points of view.
Or arguments and counter-arguments.
Absolutely. Model 3, one conducts maybe more typical type of instruction while the other one is collecting formative assessment data. This could take place during the do now phase or any parts of the lesson. The most powerful way of using that formative assessment data that the teachers collect is to group the students based on the data right away. Rather than grouping the kids as, I'll take the English learners,
and I'll take the rest.
Teachers decide on how to group based on the data collected on the spot.
And not on the student's language proficiency. So looking at the content for grouping instead of the language proficiency.
But we mentioned earlier, if you have two teachers in the room, then grouping is a non-negotiable. So we have plenty of choices to consider, and some look very similar. If you notice, models 4, 5, and 6 are almost identical. They're truly variations on the same theme. So let's unpack them.
Okay. In Model 4, the students are generally divided into fairly equal groups, and the two teachers teach the same content. But they might not teach the same content in the same way, using the same tools or resources. So one teacher might be in front of the room using the smart board, while another teacher is in the back of the room using erasable whiteboards with students or handheld tablets.
This model is also really ideal for a jigsaw type of differentiation. If we're unpacking a novel or exploring a particular phase or time in history, Group A can take one part of that topic and Group B can explore the other topic. So this is also part of respectful differentiation. The students don't always see that the lower level is going with one teacher and the higher level students are going with the other teacher. So varied configurations are really important.
In Model 5, we call this one teacher pre-teaches and one teaches alternative information. Now, what we have observed in many classes that we have visited, that the pre-taught group sometimes is smaller than the other group that is being taught alternative information, whereas sometimes the pre-taught group is larger depending upon the need. Now, interestingly enough, we've found more often than not that the pre-taught group doesn't only have English learners in it, that it's a heterogeneous group based on students' content knowledge and need.
Absolutely. If you take a look at Model 6, it's almost identical. That model stands for reteaching and alternative information for the other group. This slide, or rather this model, reminds us that English learners need multiple meaningful opportunities to master new content and to develop language skills. So one of our favorite mantras are, just because you taught it, it doesn't mean they got it. So opportunities for pre-teaching, front-loading, activating prior knowledge, that's Model 5, and then reteaching, practicing, and applying the new skill or new knowledge are all necessary language and literacy learning opportunities for English learners. So we strongly urge you to explore the opportunities that Models 5 and 6 offer.
Model 7 is probably the most flexible model. We we are looking sometimes at the special education model that has three groups. One teacher takes one group, the other teacher takes the other group, and one works independently, and the students rotate between the teachers. But in this model, we have observed station teaching or centers in elementary schools where students sometimes are working in their groups independently, and the teachers circulate the groups and find that they support students that way, and they monitor their progress and also do some on-the-spot formative assessment as well as teach. We've also found sometimes up to 8 groups in this model, and one teacher may stay stationary with one group while the other teacher circulates and gives support. So this is one of, I think, the most flexible co-taught models.
Absolutely. So a question that we often get is, how do we select models for instruction? We'd like to give 3 pointers regarding this. So the first and most important question to consider is, what is the purpose? What is the goal of the lesson? Rather than retrofitting the different models with content, our practice and our coaching is always driven by instructional goals set for the students, for student learning. So what is the purpose of instruction, and which of the models would best match that purpose that we set for the instructional goals for the lesson?
One of your favorite expressions is, why on earth?
Yes, why on earth? Setting an intention, setting a purpose for the lesson. A yoga mantra that I like to use is, what is your intention for this lesson? So translating that to everyday language, why on earth would we be using a particular co-teaching model? What are we going to achieve with that configuration?
The second one is variation. We have noted these 7 models originally in our original research. And then the more classes we started visiting, the more we realized that teachers were taking these models as springboards, and they were creating their own.
And we also want to recognize or acknowledge right away that everything that we write, everything that we publish is really, as Maria said, a springboard rather than prescriptive and dictating a certain way of implementation. We really hope that the various ideas, models, and templates, and just about anything that we have ever published will offer a pathway to teacher creativity and would invite teacher autonomy and empowerment rather than restricting teacher practice to just one way of doing something. So that's what we mean by variation. We truly invite teachers to explore how these 7 models could end up being 27 or 37 different ways of configuring the classroom.
And I think we have noted in our new book variations on each of these models, at least 4 or 5 for each model.
Absolutely.
That would be.
Yeah.
And then last but not least is flow. How teachers use these models seamlessly throughout their lessons. So once these models become a part of regular practice, we have noticed teachers moving in and out of several models during a lesson, and they really have a tremendous flow, and the students benefit from that as well.
Absolutely. We're very excited to take you into some classrooms, and we'll tell you a little bit about what's happening in each of these photographs. So here, please notice that Danielle, the classroom teacher, is leading instruction for the large group. All the students are together. But Amy, while she's sitting on the side, she's right near the students who might need immediate intervention or support understanding directions for the upcoming lesson.
And we observed this lesson and noted that this model was used probably for about 7 minutes in the beginning of the lesson to introduce new information and material.
And we also noticed that later in the lesson, Amy took the lead and Danielle positioned herself in that supporting role. So it's very important to make sense of this model, the one teach and one teach on purpose model, in a way that all the students accept both teachers as their real teachers.
In Model 2, we mentioned before that two teachers teach the same content to the whole class, but that each teacher doesn't have the same role or responsibility. Here we see Nicole and Danielle again, and Nicole is reading a story aloud, and Danielle is eliciting from the students what strong verbs are in the text, and she makes note of them on chart paper.
Here, please notice that Leah is walking around with a clipboard that has every student's name, not just the English learners' names, but all students' names. This picture was taken during the do now and homework check time of a high school math lesson, and Leah is collecting very important information, how well the students did on their homework assignment and how well they are tackling the do now assignment. Based on those two types of data that Leah collects, later on, Leah and Joel, you're going to see in a few pictures, make very important decisions regarding grouping strategies.
In fact, that's the next picture.
That's the next one? Okay.
So they start with this model, so they gathered formative assessment data. And now you see Leah and Joel, the class is divided in two, and they use that assessment data to group the students. So Leah has the students that need a little bit more step-by-step instruction, and Joel took the students who could work a little bit more independently.
If you look really, really close, you might be able to see that Leah is holding up a small erasable whiteboard towards the student, and she's modeling how to solve a word problem while she's eliciting some input from students. Joel, on the other hand, gave directions to the students to tackle the word problem on their own while he's checking on the individual students in his group. They are on exactly the same math problem.
Here we see Amy engaged in Model 5, which is pre-teaching. So she has a group of students on the carpet, and she is pre-teaching phonemic awareness skills, where the classroom teacher is out of the shot here, and she is working on developing what we call that alternative information with students, where she is having students looking at different word wall words, I believe, at the time. Now, we would like you to notice that Amy is not just seated with English learners, that these students were grouped for pre-teaching due to their need to develop phonemic awareness skills. So Amy is in with a heterogeneous group of students.
On the next slide, you will see Leah working independently and intensively with one single English learner. This model is one reteach and one teaches alternative information. The rest of the class was working in small groups. That's going to be the next slide, actually. But this particular slide shows how Leah is able to offer intensive intervention to the student who needs to read the math problem one more time, highlight the key vocabulary, identify the power word, as we like to refer to it, as being able to decide on the mathematical operation that's needed to solve the problem.
And here we see this math classroom divided into multiple groups. So Leah remains stationary at the help desk, whereas Joel, who's seated in the front with one group, actually circulated around the room, supporting each team of students to complete their math tasks. So this is an interesting combination of both Model 6 and Model 7. But we often see this as just Model 7, where one teacher remains stationary and one teacher interacts with a variety of different groups of students.
What was very unique, if you recall, Maria, about this particular lesson is that Joel used gaming theory he told the students that they have to be perfect at their level. So these are leveled groups, and the students had to be able to master certain math skills on a particular level before they were presented with more challenging math tasks. And the students accepted that that's the way they can get to the next level in their math skills if they first have the foundational skills. And if their team members can bring them along, which was also something that Joel encouraged each team to work together on those math problems. If they can't be moving along at the same pace, that's when Leah was working in the front of the classroom with individual students and offer that instructional support that was needed.
We did observe Joel talking with one student in particular on one team who was struggling,
Yeah.
and then made the suggestion that he go to the help desk as well. And again, that student wasn't an English learner. So again, using Leah at the help desk to support all students in the class.
So we'd like to offer you 5 ways to unpack each of the previous 7 models. These could be 5 pointers, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of them. So the first is roles and responsibilities, advantage and then challenges, low prep, pro prep strategies, instructional intensity, and impact on student learning. Well, let's see what each of these mean.
Well, we like to delineate in each model of instruction what one teacher does and then what the other teacher does. Now, notice we didn't say the classroom or content teacher does this and then the ELD, ELL teacher does that. We truly believe that to have an equitable teaching team, that both teachers should be able to take on any responsibility that takes place in the classroom. So, just for an example, when one teacher is explaining the lesson objective, the other teacher can model and demonstrate what the students need to know and do. When one teacher describes a strategy or skill, the other teacher can be giving students examples via a document camera, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to understand that although looking at the model in the top right corner, you notice it's Model 2, where 2 teachers are teaching the same content to the entire class, that each teacher can take on a different role and have a different responsibility at the same time.
Another angle that you could take is examining each of the 7 models from the vantage point of what are the advantages of using that particular model. And rather than disadvantages, we like to use the term challenges, recognizing that every single model will have some very specific advantages why you would want to choose that model, but also each of these models will present a fair amount of challenges.
And I think knowing the challenges are important because it helps teachers to be able to mitigate them. The next are the strategies, and each model we have determined strategies that would be appropriate. Not that these strategies are specific to each model, but that these are some strategies that teachers can use in order to provide instruction using particular models. We call them low prep because they have a low amount of preparation, and we also call them pro prep, which is protracted preparation, which means much more time it would take and materials very often for the strategies to be implemented. So some ideas for Model 2 for low prep strategies. We mentioned before the think aloud, where one teacher might be reading aloud, the other is thinking aloud. A scaffolded opinion chart, which actually maps out opinion, reasons, and evidence. So one teacher can be talking about creating or developing opinions, and the other teacher can be noting these. Non-linguistic cues. Both teachers can also use non-linguistic cues, such as sketches and diagrams, gestures and voices and intonation. For pro-prep strategies, visual cues that can be found on Google Images as well as other websites. That takes time. It takes time to look for these images. A partially completed 2-column notes is another way to help students write notes that are going to identify main idea and details, so that has to be pre-planned, as well as a write aloud. So a writing process guide that has to be, again, planned ahead.
Yet another perspective that we could take when we unpack each of these 7 models is how are these models going to contribute to instructional intensity? If you have 2 adults in the room, 2 professionals in the room, grouping strategies, as we mentioned earlier, are a must. But how are we going to maximize the impact of these grouping strategies? So we invite you to consider the following criteria for making grouping considerations. What is the content that the students need to master? What are the objectives that you set for them? Even the space, how are you going to be able to navigate and manage the classroom space that's available? What will be the learning activities that are created and differentiated for the sake of the students, and so forth.
Grouping strategies also have to take a variety of items into consideration that are here on the screen. So what level of language do students have? What's their home language, skill ability, and all of these points that really help teachers to determine how to best group students.
And with co-teaching, our ultimate goal is enhanced impact on student learning. So collecting formative assessment data, monitoring student progress. When you have 2 adults in the room, periodically one can take on the role of the assessor, the observer, the data collector, or the progress monitor person, and documenting student progress based on set criteria. Here is an example that you might want to adapt or just use as is.
And formative assessment data is key to planning lessons. The next part of the collaborative instructional cycle is co-assessment.
So earlier we introduced you to Danielle and Nicole, and here they are again in action as they are examining student work samples, and they're also looking at their lesson plans, their curriculum guide, how they're connecting co-assessment, reflecting on their own teaching, and co-planning the next lesson.
Here is a sample of what Danielle and Nicole were analyzing during this particular session. Students were asked to write a story with problem and solution. And here they have 2 students, and they're able to determine with samples of student work how to go about the subsequent lessons.
Remember, this was the lesson where the goal was for the students to use strong verbs.
Yes.
And strong words in general. So the particular focus for this co-assessment session between Danielle and Nicole was to analyze student data for strong language, such as slope instead of hill or mountain.
We sometimes guide our co-teachers to ask particular questions in order to provide them with some focus for their co-assessment. So here are 3 possible questions. What are our shared goals for student learning? How will all students include our English learners? How will all students, including our English learners, at every level of language proficiency demonstrate success? And what instruction will we provide collaboratively to ensure the success of all students? We often say that it's so important to use the pronouns we and our when we're sharing information with one another. It makes for a very powerful collaborative practice.
And we continue to recognize the need for differentiation. So if we believe, as we do, in differentiated instruction, then we also invite you to consider differentiated assessment tasks and assessment measures. That takes time. That's why we are such strong proponents of the collaborative instructional cycle that is co-planning, co-instruction, co-assessment,
and now reflection. We were very impressed when we had the opportunity to hear Joel and Leah reflect on their co-teaching. It was interesting when Joel first started this journey with Leah that Joel was not certain that the co-teaching would be effective with English learners. And to his great surprise, he discovered that it most certainly was.
The one way that the reflection can lead to action is considering what the co-teaching team might decide to stop doing,
Start doing.
or continue doing. A little bit of a more complex way of reflecting on the co-teaching or collaborative relationship is to use some of these sample questions. As you notice, we focus both on language and conceptual understanding. In all of our work, we always combine and integrate content and language development.
And notice again, we use do we or is our in our questioning. Because again, that really reinforces the idea of the collaborative relationship.
We also integrate other authors' work, such as Silver and colleagues' Principles of Deliberate Optimism, and offer the following guiding questions for co-teacher reflection. Recognizing that some things will be within our control and others might not be, yet we have to take a proactive stance and try to make sure that we improve our practice.
We also offer various tools for examining classroom practices, and one that we are very excited about is our Deliver tool. Our Deliver tool is not an evaluation tool. It is a tool to help teachers better understand their practices in the co-talk class and the impact they're making on student learning. So we invite you to examine the Deliver tool more carefully and to better be able to address different practices in the co-talk class.
So we'd like to remind you by saying something very dangerous. We've said it many times, so we're going to say it again. Co-teaching is going to fail. But don't tweet this yet. You could tweet the rest of the sentence, which is co-teaching in any school is likely to fail if the entire collaborative instructional cycle of co-planning, co-instruction, co-assessment, and reflection is not honored.
If you don't have co-planning, there is no co-teaching. If you're not looking at student work together and reflecting, there is no co-teaching.
So we invite you to embrace this entire collaborative instructional cycle and let us know if there are any questions that we can answer.
Hello, I have quite a few questions. I want to let everybody know we probably will not get to all of them since we have a significant number of questions, but I will send all the questions to the presenters and they will send out answers to you along with the video later in the week. So first question, as a school starting out with the ELL co-teaching model in year 6, which model will the content teacher be more comfortable with at first in your experience?
That's a very interesting question. What we've found with novice co-teaching teams, Model 7 is a good go-to model because there's a lot of flexibility within Model 7. Teachers can be responsible for creating their own mini lessons within that model. What we do suggest is that teachers begin their lesson with Model 2, even if it's to say good morning or good afternoon to students, maybe to introduce the objectives together, and then the students can be divided into multiple groups. And this way, teachers often feel that they have more control over their particular groups during the lesson.
Terrific. Another question, our experience shows us that the humanities and the sciences are the two subject areas where the ELL students struggle with academic language the most. Is this a common scenario that you see?
Well, we are from New York, and in New York, the default or primary choice for co-teaching for English learners is the ELA classroom. However, even the New York State policy includes a flexibility clause which states that any of the other core content areas, math, science, social studies, may also be used for co-teaching. Recently, with a colleague, Carrie McDermott, we just completed a year-long study in which we analyzed secondary social studies co-taught classrooms. So we often find that there are local variables which content area will be chosen for co-teaching. If possible, we recommend more than one content area, such as Danielle and Nicole. They're actually co-teaching multiple content areas, supporting both the literacy, language and literacy development in their English learners, as well as math and science.
Thank you. Another question, I'm wondering if you could elaborate more on the co-planning and implementation process when the teachers have different levels of experience, such as a more novice teacher and a more experienced teacher. I find our more novice teachers tend to defer to our more experienced teachers. Do you have thoughts on this?
That's a very interesting question. We have observed teams of teachers where there is one very experienced teacher and the other who is the beginning, teacher. And very often, the best teaching teams have the experienced teacher more as a mentor teacher. So it's vital for that more experienced teacher to invite the novice teacher to I'm losing my words, to invite the novice teacher to contribute to the act of planning. So it really is upon the experienced teacher to really bring the novice teacher into the collaborative practice.
I've also noticed a couple of other scenarios. One is when co-teaching became a vehicle for mentoring.
Yeah.
So the co-teacher, one particular co-teacher I'm thinking of, was a triple certified ELA, special ed, ELL, and was assigned to co-teach with a only ELA certified middle school colleague. So this novice teacher was not certified in special education or ESL, yet this partnership grew to be such a strong example of how teacher leadership can also be added to the mix. So a highly seasoned, highly respected teacher became a mentor to this new teacher, and we're happy to report to you that that new teacher is still in our profession after 7 years. He has not left our field yet, so mentoring the new teacher through co-teaching proves to be very powerful. On the flip side, we've also seen co-teaching partnerships in which the novice teacher, the recently certified teacher, is bringing absolutely fabulous brand new ideas, especially in the field of technology integration, that the more seasoned teacher might not have had any training in yet. So we often like to invite co-teaching teams when we do workshops with them is to write down all of their strengths. What do they bring to the table? And then not what their weaknesses are, but what is something they would like to learn from another person. And we encourage, of course, lifelong learning. And no matter how novice or how seasoned you are, what is something else that you'd still like to learn from each other? And these are fabulous conversations. So we invite all of our listeners to this webinar to reflect on that. What strengths you bring to the table, and what would you like to learn from another colleague?
You also have to be cognizant, experienced or novice. Some teachers really don't know how to go about collaborating. So at that point, teachers do need training. Teachers do need coaching. Teachers do need support.
Thank you. What would be a better grouping methodology for small group rotations, mixed groups or same ability groups?
Well, it depends.
It depends. Again, what is your purpose? What is your intention? If you have students that are at different reading levels, then you might level them according to their reading ability, not necessarily their language ability. If you have students that are in, you know that you have a group of students that are beginning level English learners, and you want to provide them with some mini lessons to support their basic communication skills, then you're going to support them homogeneously. So it all depends on what the purpose of the lesson is. That should then inform how students are grouped.
Terrific, thank you. What exactly do you mean by the term pre-teaching?
So pre-teaching, of course, is an abbreviation. We go into an entire chapter just unpacking what that is. Pre-teaching may refer to front-loading, another fancy term for building background. But when we build background, first we want to assess background, activate prior knowledge, and build background. So all of these terms all point in the same direction, that sometimes our English learners need some additional work on foundational skills or prior knowledge that might be necessary for the upcoming lesson. As I mentioned earlier, we did some intensive work in the secondary social studies context, and that we found is one area, especially in U.S. history, American history, where our English learners might not have had any prior knowledge related to the type of topics and concepts and historical facts, timelines that we need to talk about and study.
Another question, are these models only for schools with very large populations of ELLs?
No, we have seen, visited, or researched schools where there are low incident English learner populations to schools where the majority of the population would be considered, up to 80% of the population would be English learners or former English learners or emerging bilingual students who are growing up in a bilingual family, even if they're not labeled as English learners. So we have found, as we mentioned earlier, that establishing the purpose of using each model is very important. And based on the local variables, the demographic variables, as well as the content and language goals for the lesson, teachers can decide which of these models will be most beneficial. We have rarely seen more than 3 or 4 models in a particular lesson. Joel and Leah actually were able to accomplish that. They used 6 out of the 7 models in a 40-minute period. But most typically we see 2 or 3 or 4 different models. So we hope to empower teachers to make those professional choices based on those many, many variables that we mentioned. We could not prescribe any one way of doing co-teaching.
I have to say we've also observed where there are students that are scattered among the grades. Maybe there's one student in one class and another student in another class. What one teacher does is she'll gather all the students on the grade level and put them in one class during a co-taught lesson. And this way they get the advantage of being in a co-taught class. As long as there's continuity among the grade level or the content, it seems to work as well.
We're also aware of some unique configurations, for example, in rural areas where formerly the ESL teacher traveled to 3 different schools and basically spent more time in her car than in the classroom with the students. So the decision was made that they're going to take a modular approach to collaboration and co-teaching. So the ESL teacher remained with one particular co-teacher for multiple days, and that's why we call it the modular approach. Got really in-depth support and lots of coaching and peer modeling for her colleague on how to address complex contexts and concepts. I have my ELL moment going on, I guess. So how to do all that while there's this opportunity for intensively working with the ESL teacher. But then the ESL teacher left and spent 3 or 4 days with another colleague. So this rotation was just a very unique, out-of-the-box kind of thinking related to co-teaching, when previously co-teaching was not even imaginable, since this teacher had to run around and drive around to multiple schools. The school decided that collaboration and co-teaching has a place even in that kind of a context.
Terrific. And last question that I'm going to get to now, and again, I'll send you the other questions, and you can answer them for the people that participated. How can we gain access to the forms you showed us during the presentation?
Well, every single form we shared directly came out of our new book.
Yes,
And
teaching for English learners.
yeah, if we could show the next slide. So we have quite a few books, but these are 3 that we are most known for. So the forms, the templates, the summary charts, they all came out of our latest book, which is the yellow one. And all the images, the photographs, came out of the video clips that are also featured in the yellow cover.
Yes.
I'm happy to step in here, Maria and Andrea. I want to thank you, the 2 of you, first of all, for an absolutely amazing presentation. And as Andrea says, all of the forms, along with supplemental video showing each of the instructional models in place, can be found in Co-Teaching for English Learners, and we're making that available to you at a 20% discount as long as you use the promo code COTEACH. As far as remaining questions go, Andrea and Maria are available to answer them via Twitter and the hashtag CoTeach4ELs. You can see this here. And for each of you, I'm sorry, also I want to mention that the original book, which is essentially a starter guide, Collaboration and Co-Teaching, and the Collaborating and Coaching Teachers for English Learners, which is a guide for administrators, will also be available via the promo code COTEACH. And we'll follow up with all of you with this information, along with PowerPoints and the recorded presentation, and a certificate of attendance. And apart from the certificate of attendance, you're free to share and use in PLC experiences with your teachers. So if you do not receive these emails, it's probably because you've opted out, and I would encourage you to reach out to me directly, and I can share them. My email address is Maura, with an M, M-A-U-R-A, .sullivan@corwin.com. And I'm also happy to facilitate with any of you conversations about possibly bringing Andrea and Maria to your school or district for professional development learning opportunities. So I think that's it, and I just want to thank you again, particularly you East Coasters. I know it's very late. We're East Coasters too, and we wish you the very best of luck, and thank you, Maria and Andrea.
You're so very welcome. It was our pleasure.
Thank you so much. We really had a lot of fun co-presenting.
Yes, we did.
We did too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. I guess we're signing off. Thank you. Bye.